Your hair analysis can be used in different ways, your clinical appraisals for that extra information.
Absolutely. It's really good. I always find, if I'm stuck with a client, it's like, why am I stuck? There's something else going on here that I can't figure out. Okay, it's time to do the next thing. It's time to take that hair sample and send it off. So we're sending off hair from the back of the head.
Now, it works like this. Hair grows at a rate of about 1 centimetre a month. We prefer the clean, untreated hair. At the back of the scalp area, the chances are, and I can even see your hair now, Geraldine, I can see about 1 or 2 centimetres of fresh growth underneath. If we cut the hair as close to the skin as possible, take that first couple of centimetres of untreated hair, all our reference ranges are established on scalp hair. That's what gives us the best information.
Hello and welcome. Mentoring with Geraldine is a bite-sized practitioner podcast for naturopaths, nutritionists, herbalists, and practitioners. This podcast responds directly to your needs, the needs of the practicing natural therapist. With interviews, herbal discussions, something business and something clinical each week, you'll get the variety you need and enjoy to stay motivated in practice. Hello, Ian, and welcome to Mentoring with Geraldine and the Bite Size Podcast, and welcome to all of our listeners. So today we've got Ian Tracton from Interclinical Laboratories with us. Now, I use Interclinical Laboratories and I use the HTMA test, so I thought it was really interesting if I got Ian on to talk to us about the company and about how he got into this and started, because like many of us, our stories of how we got into something are really different and really interesting. And Ian has a really interesting story about his. So he's had Interclinical since 1996. Is that right?
Yes.
And it's just growing and growing. And it's and you use international companies, you've got international resources, and there's tons to talk about. So
we work a lot with Australian resources as well, let me say that.
Excellent. Well, you've got a range of products as well. So but I really want to talk about the hair testing, and let's start by how you got into this business.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've been involved in this for a long time now, Geraldine. I go back probably 35 years with hair tissue mineral analysis. And how I fell into this is I actually have a degree that I got a long time ago, which was a double major in accounting and financial management, which I probably have never used a day in my life.
No.
And I always say, at my age, I gave it to my parents. They have it on their wall. But actually, I became a business manager. And I got involved with a doctor who had a very busy service, and I would help to manage the clinic and manage the practice. And he also had a private pathology service where he had bought an atomic spectrometer. He had bought some other very interesting testing equipment. And I would call him one of the Australian pioneers in orthomolecular medicine or integrative medicine, Dr. Alan McClay. So I started working with Alan many years ago, and that's how I fell into it. And so managing his practice and helping manage clients and what was going on at the lab. And you learn a lot when you're involved in all aspects of an organization. And it was probably picking up the telephone when we had some staff away from time to time, and you pick up the phone and we'd get a mother at the other end of the phone saying, I have to thank your company. You saved my daughter's life, or you saved my son, or you really helped them. And I'd be a little bit, oh, okay, this is really interesting. By the way, thank you for telling us, but what did we do? And back in the late 80s, it was invariably always picking up an elevated level of lead or an elevated level of mercury in the hair tissue sample. And where we'd have a young man, 12-year-old kid, really all of a sudden very good at school. And then all of a sudden his grades were going down, his concentration wasn't there. Mum and dad doesn't know what's going on. They go to their doctors, they're not finding anything. And they came into our practice And Alan would say, let me run a hair tissue mineral analysis. And why would he do that is predominantly to test for nutrient minerals and for heavy metals. Now, I will probably say back in the 80s and probably even the early 90s, we were not very accurate on many of the nutritional minerals we were testing, the calcium, the magnesium, but the heavy metals we would get right. We would often get right. The equipment was very good for that type of testing, but for nutrient minerals, you need much more sophisticated analysis equipment. Anyway, so that's how I fell into it. And I thought, oh my God, hair tissue mineral analysis, what a fabulous service. This is ahead of its time. Why isn't more doctors using it? Why isn't more naturopaths using it? And actually, we did have a strong base of what I would call nutrition-orientated doctors today, or environmental doctors that would use the hair analysis. But the service had a natural growth, particularly with naturopaths and with herbalists and nutritionalists as well, because really it gave these practitioners something solid to base recommendations on. Now, by about 1992, we knew our equipment was already 10 years old and we were doing it in Sydney. And we'd been already trying for a number of years to get Medicare to cover part of the cost.
Right.
And Medicare would, we'd had many discussions, we'd written long submissions to them. We put a lot of work into it, to be honest with you, at the time. And it came really after many years of going down that track. By about 1994, it was like they said to us, look, hair analysis, yes, fantastic screening. It's not a diagnostic screening, it's a general health screening. And I'd say to them, well, hold on a minute. Maybe on some of the elements, you can say it's a general health screening. But when we get that elevated level of cadmium or mercury or arsenic in our charts, that's a diagnostic result.
Totally.
You can act on that. You know, it didn't float into the hair. I mean, you've been in touch with, you've been either touching it, you've been breathing it, you've been ingesting it. We know it's creating a whole lot of problems. We need to treat it, we need to isolate it, we need to mobilize it out of the body. And they really said to us at that time, it doesn't matter who's in power, whether it's a Liberal government or a Labor government, that Medicare system's got no more money.
Right.
It'll be, so it remained as a private pathology service. And to be honest with you, by 1994, we needed to reinvest to the tune of well over $1 million to upgrade our equipment to world-class standards. And at that time, we made the decision, if we can't get Medicare to cover part of this service, I know that our practitioners take the data that we put forward at face value. If that data is not accurate, you're better off not having the data in the first place, to be perfectly honest.
Totally.
And so I really searched very hard around the world, and there was only a very small handful of laboratories that did a fairly good job at this. And one laboratory in particular, I was very keen to work with. And in the end, it took a few years to sort everything out. And in 1994, I actually started working with International Trace Elements. And that was a game changer, because all of a sudden we had the most accurate, precise data being on our reports. It wasn't just on the heavy metals anymore. Our sophistication on nutrient minerals moved to another level. And I think that was the beginning of taking HTMA, nutrient and toxic element testing, in clinic for practitioners to a new level. And we could see not just the heavy metals anymore, but we were starting to get great information on calcium balances, magnesium balances, zinc, iron. The last place you're going to find a deficiency of any of those elements is in the blood. When you get a low level of calcium in the blood or iron in the blood, this problem's been going on for a long time, or there's a metabolic problem going on. And so why is that the case? Homeostasis of blood. The blood will aggressively take calcium ions out of our bone reservoir to service the biological function of calcium in the body. So we've got the blood aggressively taking these calcium ions, and who's going to suffer? Our bones, our connective tissues. That's actually what's happening. And so that's why you don't do a blood test to really test your calcium levels. You do a bone density test to get, but by that stage, we've already got a problem that's already developed. And I think I remember seeing many years ago that one of the studies that we looked at, that they deprived, this was, I think, a NASA study, but they deprived these lovely horses of any form of calcium. And apparently there was 70% bone degeneration before there was any notable changes in blood serum calcium levels. So looking at the body tissue tells us more information. We want to see how those minerals that are in the blood that have made their way across the intestinal wall, through your gut, into the blood, how they are getting transposed into the tissues. And we're looking at the minerals on an intracellular level. That gives us different information from blood. Sometimes the HTMA results marry up with your blood tests. Other times it doesn't. And then we can go into the explanations and looking at why it hasn't gone. And that's already giving you good clinical information to start acting upon.
Yeah. So when we're sending, because I use it, I don't use it for every client, totally honest. I use it maybe 1 in 8 or 1 in 9. So, it's not, and sometimes I notice I'm using it more and then I don't use it for ages. And then I'll use it again for 3 or 4. It's always, for me, it's always been an up and down usage. But when we're doing it and we send the hair to you and then you're sending it to the States. So it does take a little while for the results to get back to us, but that's fine, because there's always something.
We're talking about 10 working days. Yeah. You can really, it's in between consultations. You book your consult in, you prepare, you might be doing other pathologies as well. It's interesting what you say there, Geraldine, and that's right. We have 2 types of practitioners who will use the service. I have a lot of practitioners that won't invoke any, if you like, heavy duty course of nutritional therapy until they get all their information back. Because sometimes what you think you want to do with your patient and where your patient's at can be 2 different things. Yeah. But then we get our other practitioners who, common scenarios, you don't really have a need for it. You will work with your patients, but if after 2 or 3 months you're not getting a good clinical outcome, your hair tissue mineral analysis becomes an excellent fallback position to get new clinical information on board that you would not have seen through a physical appraisal or looking at white spots on the nails that can sometimes be reflective of a copper imbalance as well. So white spots aren't always. And so your hair analysis can be used in different ways, your clinical appraisals for that extra information.
Absolutely. It's really good. I always find, if I'm stuck with a client, it's like, why am I stuck? There's something else going on here that I can't figure out. Okay, it's time to do the next thing. It's time to take that hair sample and send it off. So we're sending off hair from the back of the head, and my hair obviously naturally grows pink like this.
Naturally.
It's naturally pink. So with hair dyes and things like that, do they struggle with those through the machines?
Look, it's well, again, if the hair has been affected by a hair dye, we do a 36, 37 element report, generally speaking. And so the hair dye may affect 1, 2, it rarely affects more than 3 elements. If we know the hair dye, and I'm not sure what pink actually does, I don't know what mineral affects pink, but usually red will artificially elevate copper. Bleach and perms can artificially elevate calcium and magnesium. Blackening agents, darkening agents can elevate lead, and blues are cobalt. So I have to check, maybe it's good to look into the product ingredients to see what it might be doing. Now, it works like this. Hair grows at a rate of about 1 centimeter a month. We prefer the clean, untreated hair. At the back of the scalp area, the chances are, and I can even see your hair now, Geraldine, I can see about 1 or 2 centimeters of fresh growth underneath if we cut the hair as close to the skin as possible, take that first couple of centimeters of untreated hair, all our reference ranges are established on scalp hair. That's what gives us the best information. We don't want hair that's longer than about 4 centimeters. We want to get the more recent metabolic activity. So if the hair is only half a centimeter long, you're going to get a result of what's been going on with that patient for the last 2 weeks. If we get hair that's 2 centimeters long, we're averaging the data over 2 months. If you get hair that's at 4 centimeters long, we'll get the data averaged over approximately 4 months. Hair is a historical report. Unlike blood that gives you a snapshot of what you've had for breakfast, or urine, what the body is eliminating at this moment in time. But hair gives us more like a rolling movie picture over time, and it averages that data. So it doesn't have the highs and lows of morning, lunch, afternoon. We're getting a nice consistency. So when we get that elevated level of the heavy metal, this is something that's seen over a period of time. Or we get a low zinc or a high zinc. Again, we're getting a picture of something that's not a snapshot. This is a problem that's going on over the month, over that period, and that's something that we can act upon and treat on it. Now, we treat on a nutritional level. Okay, I'm always going to say Interclinical is a conservative nutritional medicine company. Many of my clients, our naturopaths, our doctors, they hear me say this all the time. We work on established nutritional principles. We treat by rebuilding the biochemical balances. Sometimes things are too high. The body sometimes is pushing something out. Chromium is a very good example, where elevated chromium sometimes is a requirement for additional chromium to help in blood sugar regulation. But elevated copper is usually too much copper, and too much copper will bring down, and that can be often a cause, with pyroles and kids on the spectrum is usually very often low zinc, high copper. I mean, the hair analysis gives you insights into your patient that you just don't get with other pathologies.
No, it is totally different. And it's really handy because when you get the reports as well, because you've got a choice of reports as well, haven't you? So you can get the bigger report. And so you can get a lot more information if you want to. I always get the number 2 report, I think it is. I think there's 3, aren't there? So
I appreciate that. It actually saves us a lot of time in the laboratory, because there's things in the Profile 2 and Profile 3 report that gives a very comprehensive client medical discussion. There's key insights into maybe what minerals and vitamins and nutrients we feel might be appropriate, and it saves us a lot of time here because those answers are actually in, and the doctor's report is specifically written for the doctor's report. We actually don't give the supplement recommendations to the patient. They might need some minor modifications based upon medications, other things going on. And sometimes, I mean, even today we had a case where anemic patient, they've been anemic all their life. We've recommended copper at this stage because the zinc was high, the copper was low. Unusual type of chart where 85% it's the other way around. But you got to be mindful that sometimes copper's the problem, and copper's required in hemoglobin production and for other reasons as well. So sometimes we use copper to help to build iron, but in this particular case, after speaking with the practitioner, we also felt that our iron supplement would be very appropriate as well.
Yeah, it's great that we've got this whole, it's a whole dynamic, because we're getting the whole body and we're getting a longer term view. So by the time we've seen our clients for, been seeing them a few months, and you're like, what is going on here? It's a great time to start getting that hair if you haven't already got it, because then you're going to see what's happened over the last month. And you've been saying for a month.
Geraldine, absolutely correct. I mean, this is one of the big things. When you work with this for a long time, you realize that baseline result is really important. But where you start getting real insights with your patients is when you start doing that first follow-up, which might be, we always say it's always good to do a first follow-up and prepare your patients for a follow-up test about 3 to 6 months later, because you can't keep your patient on 75 mgs of zinc without retesting, because eventually we're going to overcompensate. And we've started driving that copper down or moving the heavy metal out, but eventually we will tilt them the other way. So without risk, you might need, and this is where adjusting the dosage comes into play. And we've got patients through practitioners that are over years, and you can actually see they've moved house and all of a sudden something's changed. They're drinking water. They might be getting tank water. There might be something else going on. There are new stressors in their body, new changes of jobs, lifestyle. And you can actually plot your patient and you actually get a fingerprint of where that patient, and you'll actually start seeing elements that this person continuously has trouble uptaking, and we need to concentrate on those things. So the follow-ups are really important, and just like you'd go and have a blood test once a year or once every second year, or you'll go to the dentist to check your teeth to see that things aren't rotting away. HCMA is an excellent tool for ongoing preventative care and ongoing monitoring of what's going on with your patient.
Yeah, because it's not expensive, so they don't go and put the price up because I said that. But realistically, when we look at the amount tests cost, it's actually one of the affordable tests.
It's got to be the most affordable test you could recommend to your patient.
Yeah.
And not only the most affordable test, it gives so much information.
Yeah.
It's giving us that information on what are the key nutrients we need to home in on. Yep. What are the, we work with homeopathic practitioners as well. And, combining a little bit of nutritional medicine with your homeopathy, if you're targeting mercury, you can do your homeopathic medicine accordingly, rather than doing a general anti-heavy metal homeopathic. Home in on specifics, homing on, we need to, but again, if you have an obstacle to cure, if you don't have the fuel, if you don't have the nutrient, it makes it very difficult. If you don't have that zinc, or you don't have that magnesium, or you don't have, sometimes it's molybdenum. I mean, we see all sorts of things today. And we must have been probably the first company in Australia to bring in elemental molybdenum, elemental manganese. We would have been one of the first working with elemental chromium. I'm sure we were the first with elemental copper. Compounds we work with, highly bioavailable. We often can even reduce the dosages with the compounds we use today. And you got to remember, what we give you in nutraceutical is much larger dosages than what you get from a good food diet. People say, I don't need nutrients, I eat a good diet. Well, that might have been true 5,000 years ago, but we didn't have the pollution.
Yeah.
We didn't have medicines.
Yeah.
We didn't have the stressors, both psychological and physiological. Yeah. We live in a very different world, and I think nutritional medicine and the right sort of testing has its place.
Oh, totally. I mean, we don't even make the enzymes that we made when we were younger. As you get older, you make fewer and fewer enzymes. Hydrochloric acid wasn't as good as what it was. So even a great diet, if it's not digested properly, you're still going to need some nutraceuticals. The point being, though, that you don't need them forever. We need to replete, like you said about the zinc. You don't want to keep on and on and on having it without looking and going, how much more do I need? Can I reduce this and have it, every other day or something, because I still need my zinc? I'm someone who uses a lot of zinc, but do I need it every single day?
Yeah.
And that's what we can work out by doing some of these tests, some of these really simple hair tests. And of course, we've got no worries about anyone being scared of needles, because it's hair.
Well, it's not intrusive. I mean, some ladies will say, I don't care what you jab into me, don't touch my hair. But look, we don't need a lot of hair today. It's 0.15, 0.2 of a gram. It's a small clump of hair. Usually take a thin line. If the hair's very long, just pull the hair up, take out a thin line, could be a couple of millimeters across by a couple of inches long, but the hair will just fall back over for a lady with long hair. With short hair, you can just, with a guy or anyone with short hair, just use thinning scissors and collect it with a clean piece of paper behind, and always put the hair in an envelope. Don't put it in a plastic bag. We don't want the hair sweating. We don't want it creating bacteria in the hair. If we put it in a lovely envelope, it actually dries out, and that data is locked within the keratin, literally hundreds of years. They've analyzed what was it, Napoleon's hair. They broke open his tomb, and he was so well preserved. Arsenic. His arsenic level was through the roof. Arsenic used to be a medicine.
Yeah, and it was makeup. It was in makeup and everything else. So they used arsenic a lot. Arsenic was used a lot.
They used a lot of heavy metals for medicine. Yeah. What did they use? Mercury for skin whitening.
Yeah. They used it.
Oh, it's scary.
It was very, very scary what they used to use. So, but yeah, Napoleon, lovely bloke. Anyway, they.
Look, it's funny. There's different hair tests out there. They're very different. We actually take the physical sample of hair.
Yep.
It goes into a test tube. We actually digest the hair physically. So now it's all the minerals are now in a liquid state, and we analyze in parts per million. It's not a general indicative analysis that a lot of the tests are. That yes, we can see some mercury there, or we can see something else there, but we're actually telling you precise measurements, which is a very different test from many of these. There's bioresonance testing, there's photospectrometry where they take a photo of it. It's not the same thing. Ours is a physical quantitative test. It's used around the world today. There are literally thousands and thousands of evidence-based studies. If you do it well, but this is the thing, it's not, you can have an atomic spectrometer, but that doesn't actually mean you'll do a very precise job either. There's a lot of interferences that come into it. And like I said, for us here, and for me personally, it's most important that we give you the most accurate data. It's what I said right at the beginning of this little chat here today. Yep. Our practitioners will take the data that we put forward at face value. And I can assure you, if you send us the same hair 3 times with 3 different names on it, I don't care whether it's 3 months apart or 3 years apart, you will get the same picture. You will get the same pattern. You will get the same results. And I honestly have to say, it's not the same for many of the other HCMA laboratories that we've tested over the years.
Right.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Hair mineral analysis is really fascinating. And so I just wanted to go over, just before we finish, you said the hair is put into a vial. And so how do they actually do it? So they put it into a...
All right. Okay, good question.
How does it actually...
The hair is placed into a test tube. Mm-hmm. The exact same amount of hair is put into each and every test tube. Mm-hmm. Then a certain acid digestion. It's usually a mixture of some hydrochloric acid, some sulfuric acid, maybe some nitric acid. Different laboratories have its own proprietary acid mix. Yep. Exactly the same amount of acid is added to each intestine. Then we put a lid. It's called closed vessel digestion. Back in the old days, we used to put our hair into the test tubes. We used to add our acid. We used to put it under the Bunsen burner to heat the test tube, and that would dissolve it. And we got all this stuff emitting into the atmosphere. So we used to have a nice ventilation, so we didn't breathe the fumes. Yep. And then it would go into the atomic spectrometer. And today, everything's on a railroad track. In other words, every sample is heated at exactly the same temperature for exactly the same amount of time. It's called a rotary carousel in a microwave digestion system. Then the hair sample is being prepared. So now I've got the liquid hair in the test tube, and now that's ready to go into the atomic spectrometer. That is an ICP mass spectrometer, which is actually the gold standard. If you want to analyze minerals in blood or minerals in urine or minerals in any biological sample, you use ICP mass spectrometer because you can get down to the lower detection limits. And then and what happens, you got the equipment will suck the sample up and spray it into the machine. What does that mean? Inside the machine, it's a big box of a machine, there's a little flame. And this flame, the sample is sprayed into the flame, and the machine is geared up to analyze the light spectrum. And every mineral has a slightly different light spectrum. So again, copper will show a bit more green, cobalt will show a bit more blue, calcium tends to be more white, and it will measure these spectrums and these measurements, and it will automatically record them. Now, we do today the reason why we can do it for such a good value price is because they do what they call simultaneous readings. We can actually measure more than several elements in a single screening. But what we find is that there's certain elements we don't test for because it can upset the accuracy of other elements. Like, for example, we pulled gold and silver out of our reports because they can affect the reliability of our nutrient elements up to tenfold. So we know if we have that problem, other labs, but other labs will still report on silver, but that's why boron needs to go through the atomic spectrometer by itself. So does antimony, so does silica, so does iodine. So these elements that can be quite costly to actually give you, our results are what we provide a fully validated result on all the elements we test for. They're not semi-quantified data. Again, semi-quantified data is indicative at best. That's not what we do. If we can't give you a result that is fully validated, we either won't report on it or we'll have to charge you a lot more money to run it through the equipment to get you a fully validated report.
Wow. That's really interesting. It's really interesting the way it comes, we snip that bit of hair, send it to you send it over to them, they put it in the vial, it digests. That sounds a bit disgusting. They send it through a flame, and then we're able to get, and that's obviously why.
There's a lot of other things that go on besides
a lot of
that.
Other things.
The QA, the QC controls are first class. Yep. What we call as NATA accreditation. We're working with a fully licensed clinical facility. That's the sort of validations that go into place. There's a lot of proprietary knowledge that comes into being able to produce a first-class result that takes it to another level. And I think that's why TEI are probably the world leaders in this type of testing.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. It's absolutely incredible. And it is something, well, that's why we know each other, because it is a test that I use. So it's brilliant. I've learned so much. Hopefully everybody else who's listening today to the Bite Size podcast has learned tons as well. And so you do need to be an association accredited professional to join up and have your clients tested. So you don't do community. It has to be done through a practitioner. So a random can't wander in and get their hair done.
Well, they can, but it'll cost them a lot more. There's actually, we only provide we have special practitioner rates, obviously. Yep. But again, when a private individual has accessed the service, which has actually cost them more than what it would have cost them to go through the practitioner, we actually refer them back to practitioners. They say, can you interpret this data? We won't actually interpret the data for them. We're the messenger. Yep. We will actually, we do the data. We'll probably give the name of 3 or 4 practitioners on our database in their location, and we will refer them off to some practitioners that we know are familiar with this work, can interpret the data. It's a proper consultation to interpret HCMA data and to take that data in context with the patient and other things going on. No, we're a service provider for the practitioner, and essentially we're there to support you guys in your practice and to make it work. If you can get a better clinical outcome faster, I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if you've enjoyed the Bite-Sized podcast, then please make sure you review us on wherever you are, whatever you're listening from. If you're listening from Spotify or iTunes or wherever you are, please give us a lovely review, because thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you, Geraldine. I really appreciate our little chat today. And look, at everything we do here in Interclinical, for us, it has to be the gold standard. Whether it's our nutraceuticals or wherever it's our testing, there's a lot of things that we don't do everything your naturopathic practitioner requires, but your bread and butter things, your major vitamins, your major minerals. I mean, if our minerals don't make a difference and we're testing for it, that's a problem. Yeah. So we have to make sure that we keep our practitioners on solid ground.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. And thank you all very much for joining us on the Bite Size Podcast. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Right. Thanks so much for joining me today. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast for the weekly episodes. If you'd like even more support and learning, then the Academy is for you. Here you'll find part 2 of the herbal discussions, more clinical learning, and case studies to support your clients in practice. Bye for now.